Everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Male Perspective. I am your host, Lana Reid, and today I have with me the guy you want to talk to if you want have some questions about startups, Dom Einhorn. He is also on an interesting note. He has just recently purchased a rugby team, as us arrogant uh, Americans like to sometimes equate with football and all of that stuff. And also, he has a very special connection to a mythical creature that is very near and dear to me, unicorns, which we're going to get into. But first and foremost, Dom, welcome to the show. Thank you for making time for me today.
Thanks for having me on the show, Lana. Pleasure.
Awesome. Now, like I said in the opening, you are the startup guy. You are the guy we're going to get us in sync here about startups. But my first question, when we talk about startups, a lot of people automatically think like tech, internet, apps, and stuff like that. So my question is for the layperson: is a startup like I want to open up 3 restaurants, or I want to open up a car wash or something like that? What is the definition of a startup?
Yeah, well, you're 100% right. I mean, the legal definition is a business that's just starting up.
Okay.
That can be in any domain. You open up a bagel shop, you open up coin up laundry. That is by definition a startup business because it didn't exist before and you're launching it. As far as we are concerned, we're most definitely falling into what described first and foremost because we specialize in technology startups only.
Okay. So let's say, Dom, you have John Doe over there and he's sitting on his couch in his living room and he says, I have a great idea for a tech startup. I'm going to call Dom up and ask him to give me $300,000 so I can do my startup. What kind of questions is Dom going to ask before he turns over $300,000?
So yeah, you probably wouldn't be speaking to me first and foremost, okay. Because we do have an intake, because we do get, I would say, on a bad day or sometimes on a good day, 50, on a bad day or sometimes on a good day, 100 plus requests that are actually, I would say, pretty well prepared, meaning they come with a pitch deck for the majority of them. A good amount of them also have pro forma financials, so they've actually done some homework before pitching us. So I think, I mean, I started as a startup entrepreneur, so I was on your side of the table first and foremost. And I've somewhat graduated, would probably be a bad term. Maybe it's a downgrade. I've become, over the years, I've become an angel investor, which, as its name indicates, you can have a hellish experience with an angel investor as well. But basically, an angel investor is usually a former entrepreneur who understands what you're trying to do, or at the very least has worked with startup entrepreneurs and understands that world a lot better than, for example, a venture capital guy or a private equity guy, which is a more sophisticated person, typically doesn't work on his own. So what you define as angel money is usually considered as easier money. I say easier, not easy. There's a big difference there as well. But usually what I like to stress is that, what we're doing here at Uniqorn is we're trying to bridge a gap that we've identified in the market between startup entrepreneurs looking for funding and angel investors and beyond providing that funding. So little anecdotes here for those of you, many of you may already be familiar with this problem. When I first started, I moved from France to the US in 1993 to launch a digital media startup. And about 18 months later, I was sitting for the first time in my life at the age of 23, 24, in front of a sophisticated investor. I was enthusiastically pitching him on my idea and what made it so unique. And he looked at me almost incredulous because clearly, he didn't understand what I was talking about, and then I let him speak. And he basically came back to me in his language, in his terminology, asked me questions like, is this a seed fundraise or are you doing a Series A? And at that time I was, usually what I say is that investors are pitching, or startup entrepreneurs are pitching on FM, and the investor is listening to AM, right? So you have a nice little disconnect there between the two worlds. And I think 25 years later, while it has somewhat improved, we still see most of these fundamental disconnects on a day-to-day basis, where, for example, you may have a very bright young kid engineer or a group of kids that came up with an amazing concept and may even have a proof of concept for that, right? Showing that there is product market fit, that there is an actual demand in the marketplace, and that they can actually sell what they have conceived very, very quickly. You mentioned the mobile app earlier. There are a number of them that we're involved in because that's at the very heart of what we do. But when it comes to them communicating to the investment community, that is something that's not being taught to them in school, or most of them. Right? There's certain curricula right now that actually is training you and actually being able to make that pitch, so you can bridge that gap. Because at one point in time, if you start a business, any business, and you intend to scale it, you logically will need to have resources to grow. Those resources usually in that space do not come by way of the banking system. When you look outside the banking system, you're typically in the early stages at the seed funding stage or the Series A funding stage, looking towards angel investors, because those are individuals and not corporations usually, even though some angel investors network and have over the last few years built angel networks. But basically, if you're able to convince those investors, that money would come to you easier and cheaper than a larger entity like a venture capital fund, right? But it's all about talking to them at the same level and understanding each other. So again, to encapsulate the problem, what you obviously often have in this space is, the scenario of, let's say, a lone wolf or a solo entrepreneur. And let's assume he's the best engineer since sliced bread, right? Well, he may be fantastic in engineering, but when he sits down in front of an investor, an astute investor, he's completely lost for most of them, right? Which is understandable because we all have specialized knowledge. So when you're in that scenario, what you really want to do is you want to think at a very early stage of your venture, who I'm going to be surrounding myself with, what complementary skill sets are they going to have to mine? Because I'm building a puzzle, and the last piece I need on that puzzle is another me when I have a gaping hole left and right. So if I'm a great salesperson, I might very well be able to convince that investor who's sitting in front of me. But if I'm an engineering startup, I clearly need some engineers. If I want to sell and market my product or service that I'm bringing to market, I need salespeople, I need quality marketers, right? So what we see very often is, again, a disconnect between the expectations of an investor and a startup. And we're trying to build an ecosystem where the two can meet and understand each other. And that's pretty much what we're doing day to day at Uniqorn.
At Uniqorn. Now, you said that there's a disconnect sometimes between the investor and the startup person. Is the disconnect that the investor expects the startup person to have all the working pieces, or I guess I'm curious about who has more expectations of the other party?
I think if you've been in the business long enough, and if you talk to a startup entrepreneur who's gone through 50 pitches and is still hasn't hit the home run, or an investor who typically goes through a lot of pitches and decks before making a decision, I think the disconnect is on both sides in terms of general expectations. So for example, a simple expectation, for example, from a startup entrepreneur would be they all believe that their idea is the best since sliced bread and the product. Nothing against it. It might very well be. Even if it is, you have to be able to communicate that value proposition efficiently to the person who's listening to you on their level of sophistication. So, for example, most investors at the angel level, they are not tremendously sophisticated in technology. So you have to be able to dumb down what it is that you've built and not lose them in engineering talk. On the flip side, the investor is well versed in financial terms and should be able to properly communicate, his value proposition to the startup entrepreneur so that two can actually find common ground. Or each party should have a specialist on the team that can bridge that gap.
I see.
But very often this is still missing. And then the startup entrepreneur says something that ticks off the investor or vice versa, right? That the investor may say something more rare, because obviously the startup entrepreneur is looking for money and sometimes does a deal with the devil or a bad deal, right? You have to be careful about that as well. I've been through that. I've done that. So usually what I tell people is like, look, I cannot tell you exactly what it is that you should be doing, but for damn sure I can tell you what it is that you should not be doing, because I've done it, right? And that's what 30 years of hindsight and experience will actually teach you.
Awesome. Now, on that note, what you should not be doing, one of the things we hear all the time about startups is this concept of pitch, the elevator pitch, which you've mentioned previously. When it comes to giving the pitch, what are some, this is the worst I have seen, please do not do this? Because you only have a certain amount of time to get this concept through. From what I'm understanding about pitches, what are some things that you should not be doing when it comes to pitches?
So obviously we're all our pet peeves. I have a few of them, right? When it comes to elevator pitches. So for example, we can talk a little bit later about what I actually would consider to be an excellent elevator pitch. But if you come to me and say, there's no such thing on the market, okay, immediately I think two things. Either there is something already on there that I know or will find within 10 seconds that you're not aware of, which is already bad, or there is no product market fit. In other words, you may have a vanity idea that you've turned into a product or service, thinking that there is a ready market there for you waiting, when in fact it does not exist.
Okay.
In the worst case scenario, it's both, right? Because here's what's happened over the last 25 years. When I started in the tech business in the 90s, it was extremely expensive to launch your business. If you needed a database, you needed to purchase in 1998, 99, 2000, what was called an Oracle server license.
Yeah, I've heard it. Okay.
MySQL. And it would set you back $32,000 per license. One example. Today, that is free. MySQL is free. Another example is in 1996 through 1999, my monthly bandwidth bill was averaging between $7,000 and $10,000 US. And I was using 800 times less bandwidth than I'm using today. And today I'm paying close to zero.
Wow.
So what has happened over the last 25 years is that the entire process of launching a technology business has been vastly democratized, which is great, and vastly demonetized, which is even greater. Meaning that today, in 2021, pretty much anyone can launch a business quickly, efficiently, cheaply. The downside to that, there are two major downsides that I personally see every single day, is number one, vastly increased competition, because as a result of everyone being able to launch quickly, efficiently, and cheaply, you basically have your neighbor has become your competitor, or your roommate has become your competitor, right? And then what you also see as a corollary is the fact that a lot of businesses pop up that have no point of being a business in the first place, which is what I call vanity ideas, vanity concepts, right?
I just want to be a business owner. I'm just so
right. I'm going to launch the next great social network, right? Well, how many of those do we still need, right? And what's really going to be the core differentiator? Like, you know, we can buy an off-the-shelf script for a few $1,000s that basically looks like Facebook, right? In all shapes and form, or worse, MySpace back in the days, right? But what's the value of that? Considering that you have some massive corporations that have already staken their claim, right? How are you going to break through? I'm not saying you can't, but prove to me what's going to make you so fundamentally different that you can actually carve yourself a niche out of a market that's so overly saturated, right? So the vast majority of them, and let's be honest, the vast majority of startups fail, right? Very quickly.
Say like 1 in 5 years or something like that?
Oh, within 2 years, 90% of them are gone.
Wow.
Right? In some extreme cases more, depending on what domain and what specialty you're actually looking at. So you have to be aware of that, right? And then there's this notion of failure, obviously, that scares a lot of people, right? For the right and the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm.
People may be afraid, because failure goes with fear, obviously, of looking bad to their peers, to their family, to their neighbors if they fail, is one example. People may be afraid of themselves. Sometimes they, what if I succeed? They're even afraid of success, right? So I've kind of like, having had my ups and downs and a lot of more failures than successes, but the successes made up for the failures, sometimes in spades, fortunately. I've kind of like developed my own philosophy about failure. And, you know, there's one metaphor I use very often. It's the metaphor of Thomas Edison, who famously invented the light bulb. And when he was asked, Mr. Edison, what made you succeed where others have failed, where every other has failed, his answer was very simple. He said, well, I finally ran out of things that did not work.
Awesome.
Right.
Awesome.
So I've had nothing but failures, right? And I actually ran out of failures. It actually had to work at the very end. I think Michael Jordan said something very, very similar about basketball when he, there's a famous quote of him when he said, look, the majority of the shots that I took were failures. I missed them, right? But the point is, I hadn't taken those shots, I wouldn't have made them either, the ones that I did make.
That's true.
Right? So I think the philosophy, I think the takeaway from the failures is that ultimately, if you're an entrepreneur, a failure becomes a stepping stone towards success. What you want to do is you don't want to delve into failure and like stay in there, right? It's a downward spiral. You want to fail as quickly, as efficiently, and as cheaply as possible. Right?
As cheaply as possible. Okay.
That's right. Because today you can iterate very quickly. You can pivot very quickly. So let's say you're a digital marketer and you're selling, I don't know, fashion online. Not something I do, but fashion online.
I heard you did an art gallery though back in the early days.
It's way different. Way different. Yeah, but whether it's art, whether it's fashion, you sell sneakers online, right? Quickly, what you want to find out is you want to find out what the industry term is CAC, CAC, customer acquisition cost is. Unless you measure that, you're never going to know whether you're failing or succeeding. Because what matters is how much you're spending to acquire a new customer versus the sales price, right? Because then you're going to have your margin of profit minus your cost, and that's how you decide whether you're actually making money or you're losing money.
Okay.
So when you're selling anything online, you're going to be testing out different marketing strategies. You may do some Google ads, you may do some Facebook ads, Twitter, et cetera, organic, social positioning, you name it. The key point there is to identify your failures very, very quickly, which you can do today with the right tools, right? So if you're running a campaign that's underperforming, it's costing you money, you can stop within a matter of hours, if not minutes, that campaign. And let's say you're running 25 or 30 of them simultaneously, which I would recommend. You know, so for example, even on Facebook ads, you run a Facebook campaign, you can have multiple creatives, multiple campaigns running at the same time, going towards the purchase of the same item. One of them may be a complete failure, another one may be a smashing success. So you want to be able to tune out of that failure quickly and efficiently, reallocate your budget towards the one that's succeeding, and by way of iteration. That's what I mean by fail as quickly as possible.
I see.
Because the sooner you notice that you're failing, the quicker you can stop and pivot away from that failure and focus on what works.
Okay.
Right? So measure everything. Look, if you're not in the tech business and you're opening a bagel shop, it's the same process, right? Because if you're a bagel shop, how are you going to bring people to your bagel shop? Well, you may take, back in the days, you may have taken a Yellow Page ad. Today, you're going to be promoting online. You got to make sure that you're on Google Places, you're on Yelp, you have good reviews, et cetera, et cetera. All of these initiatives also come with a cost. All of these initiatives also require proper iterative purposes, right? And be able to adjust on the fly and course correct along the way, quickly identify the failures, get rid of them, and then hard focus on what actually does work, right? So let's say in that same bagel shop, you realize that people love your bagels, and the number one reason for your success is word of mouth. People take a bite of the, amazing bagel. I'm a bagel fan, so I use that as, you know what I'm talking about,
yes,
right?
yes.
So you have, let's say there's a person that just takes a bite of that bagel and goes, my God. There's the line of people behind it. Oh, what did she just have? Right? So that's word of mouth, right? So you really want to focus. If that word works, continue doing that, because if you're producing an amazing product, you may never have to advertise, right? If you look at Amazon, what makes Amazon really fly is the amazing customer service. If you look at what we had before Amazon came about, and we tried to return a product, and people would give us the dirty looks and like whatnot, because what are you talking about? The product doesn't work, right? And you're still getting the dirty looks. No, sir, you had 30 days to return it. Today's day 31, right? For example. So Amazon got rid of all of these friction points, and by way of getting rid of these friction points, they built amazing trust and authority in their field. So that today, when you buy something from Amazon, you know it's going to show up virtually immediately or very, very quickly. If there's anything wrong with the product, they will take it right back, right? They slap the label on the box themselves, and they send the UPS guy to your doorstep to pick it up, right? Think of that. Think about the leap between what we experienced before, the friction points we had to live through, and now a company like this comes along. Of course, everybody's going to shift towards it. And if you've never heard of Amazon today, that's hard. But 10 years ago, and someone tells you, why you're still going to this shop where you can't return your stuff and paying a lot more, and you actually have to drive there, look for parking, you get a parking ticket while you were waiting for your product, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you buy this stuff online? Oh, isn't the person may have said, oh, isn't this dangerous? I have to put my credit card information online. Now, have you ever heard of Amazon? Right? And now they pitch you. The word of mouth is coming in. Now, the acquisition cost for Amazon of that customer is zero. It's actually below zero, because if that person now, who was referred by way of word of mouth from the other person, ends up buying, he or she will become a brand ambassador, a mouthpiece, and also bring on, 10, 15, 20 new customers that also will have a customer acquisition cost of zero. So the profitability of Amazon, and as reflected by their stock price, right? You can see where that's coming from. So you do have a dramatic shift there in customer expectations, right? The number one of them is, I'm old enough to realize how painful it was to be paying for something, not being able to return it in France, right? I grew up in France, or just having all sorts of issues and headaches and whatnot, trying to call a toll-free number in the US, which doesn't exist in France for most of the products. So you actually had to pay a toll call for a product or service that was defectious, and then you wait for 30 minutes, and then beep, 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 right? It didn't even get through, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, basically, what you're looking to do is you're trying to provide a bona fide solution to a problem. If you want to become a billionaire as an entrepreneur, it's very simple, the math. Help 1 billion people. Everything else will help. Everything else will happen by way of doing that. If you can identify a problem that's big enough, that's affecting, forget about 1 billion people, but even a few million people, and you actually remove those friction points, the money will flow. You don't have to worry about that. Because value is automatically being rewarded these days. So the perfect proof for that is, again, the Facebooks, the Googles of the world, right? When's the last time you sent a check to Facebook or to Google? Never, right? So just because the service is free doesn't mean that no one's paying for it, clearly, right? When they started, they had no business model and they made no money, okay? So they basically took a moonshot and said, this is what we're trying to build. Facebook, we're trying to connect the world, and Google, we're trying to make the entire world searchable on your fingertips. Grandiose idea, right? Sounds very simple if you can actually fulfill on that promise, which they did. And then ultimately, by building out their platforms, they had to somehow make money because the costs were racking up. And at one point in time, the investor said, hey guys, it's time to wake up. We're not just going to write you a blank check forever. It's time to make some money. Then they both artificially bolted on a business model where it didn't exist from the beginning. When they started, they had no idea how they would make money. Let's be clear about that. You can ask Mark Zuckerberg, he'll tell you the same thing. You can ask Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google, they will tell you the same thing. And then they basically, for Google, bolted on pay-per-click, AdWords, right?
Okay.
Right, just so you search for anything, and now instead of getting an organic search, you get a paid listing, right? And ended up making a killing, right? With Facebook, it's a little more, I would say, a little more fishy. You can watch some Netflix documentaries on what's being done on that front, because basically we become the product, the consumer.
Yes, it's a little
right?
bit more invasive, yes.
And we are being resold to advertisers, et cetera, et cetera. So as far as your taste buds, Facebook knows more about your taste buds than you know about yourself. And that's big data being run in the background, the algos filtering, and that's the reason why we're so addicted to social media at the same time.
Unfortunately.
Right. It's a feature of what they have built, and they're very aware of it, right? So that brings up a whole new set of challenges. But ultimately, again, going back to just brass tacks business models, they had no idea when they first started out how they would be making money. And today they figured it out.
Oh, yes, indeed. And boy, did they figure it out. Now, I want to ask you real quick, because you got a wealth of information. And we keep on going back to the bagel example, the bagel guy. And I'm pretty sure these types of startups, they know what they know. You mentioned that earlier. This guy just knows how to make bagels. But you have a program, Uniqorn has a program, an event coming up soon that's going to help the bagel guy put all the parts and pieces together, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, so I mean, the event you're mentioning is called the Startup Supercup. You can find out more about it by going to startupsupercup.com. It will be held in our little town here in southwest of France called Sarlat. That's Sarlat. You look it up. It's a beautiful medieval town. If you go downtown right now, you'd think you're back in the 12th century. So we decided to build Uniqorn outside of a big city. I personally spent over 20 years in LA, and at one point in time had enough of the big city, and I wanted to go back to a place where I could breathe and enjoy myself. So it was primarily a lifestyle decision way before COVID. And what we realized even before COVID is that a lot of people were thinking like we did, including younger people, which was somewhat surprising, right? So our town where we live and work has 9,000 souls in the winter, but 3 million tourists year round. It's the seventh most visited town in France.
Wow.
So we set up shop here about 2.5 years ago. We're currently incubating a dozen startups, all in the technology space: artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, fintech, digital media, etc., all in that space. And we decided to launch an event the city has never seen before, the Startup Supercup, which will be held on October 1, 2, 3 of 2021. And it will basically bring together 1,000 investors, primary angel investors, and some funds, angel networks, and over 100 startups that will be pitching those investors over a 3-day period of time.
Okay.
With Saturday night being the grand giveaway, there's going to be a jury consisting for half of it of professionals in the space, and the other half will be by popular vote, almost like what's the famous voice show that I'm not following? That's why I can't remember the name. The one you have in the US, where singers basically pitch against each other. America's Got Talent or something.
Oh, yeah, America's Got Talent. We've got quite a few. We've got The Voice. We got America's Got Talent. And all of this stuff.
So think of that applied to startups.
Let me ask you. I don't want to depress any of the people that might be attending, but you said 100 startups. Will all 100 startups possibly get funding, or only a certain percentage?
Well, it might well be, because there are basically two ways of them to get funding. Number one is by just networking over 3 days, because there's a whole exhibition area.
Oh, okay.
okay, where investors attend. So, and we're driving investors into those exhibition areas.
Okay.
And then the startups will also be invited to pitch on stage.
Okay.
And then there will be, there's an area that we call the blitz pitch.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little round table. You have a clock on the wall. You have 20-minute countdown.
Wow. The pressure.
Well, you have to practice your elevator pitch.
Okay.
Right? You basically are going to be standing in front of an investor with your laptop, ideally, or your smartphone if you develop a mobile app, and you're going to be pitching him as to why you should invest in your deal. But you have 20 minutes to do so, and then it rotates.
Okay.
So the idea is almost like a speed dating process where both the startup is basically seeing a lot of investors and the investors is seeing a lot of startups, with the idea of basically getting the juices flowing and making hopefully you have the match made in heaven.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you my random question and we're going to get out of here, but I want one more question before we go. And I sort of asked you this in the beginning, but I firmly believe in getting young people involved in business and finance and stuff early in age. And I'm just thinking, so you have the little one who wants to start his lemonade stand, his or her lemonade stand. What's the pitch? How do you hypothetically pitch? Dom, I want to set up a lemonade stand and I need the funding. So
yeah, so if you do that pitch, the problem you're going to have is that there's a million people that pitch like that. So rule number one, be different, right? That's rule number one of PR, be different. So the perfect example is dog bites man, that's not news. Man bites dog, that's news. So you want to be the man that bites the dog. You want to really stand out from the crowd. So you want to craft your hook points, right? Key term, your hook points. Hook points and elevator pitch. A hook point is basically a condensed version of an elevator pitch. For those of you who are not familiar with the elevator pitch, basically, let's assume you're going into an elevator and assuming you're male, and there's this beautiful woman that walks in and you want to connect with her. What are you going to say? All right? Because depending on what you're going to say, you're either going to get her to smile or turn around and leave the elevator, right? So craft that very, very carefully. It's the same thing in the startup space. Okay. So you want to be able to grab the attention in a world where that attention is lost as a result of social media. Okay? So think of it of scrolling down your Facebook feed or your YouTube feed. What's going to make you stop and actually click on something and then not be disappointed? And that part, the next part, is the engagement. So assuming you're able to hook someone with your pitch, if you just say, I need money, that's not a hook, right? You need to be able to quickly say what it is you're working on. Don't even ask for the money and basically say, hey, I'm working on the best thing since sliced bread and it's called a bagel, right? Okay, but in your field, right? And clearly stress what makes you different. Make sure your passion comes across because that's one of the first things that an angel investor will look at. And then once that person gives you the permission of going beyond, then you delve into more detail.
Okay.
So what all of you who are looking to raise money from an investor should do is you should really recraft those different stages of engagement, starting with being able to encapsulate what it is you're trying to accomplish in one sentence. Then you have your 2 or 3 sentence version. If you're given the permission to go beyond the one sentence, you then let that out. And then eventually you may have an open book. Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more. And then you can go as long as you want.
Gotcha.
The big mistake some people do is they will just send you all that crap at once, even though you haven't even said I'm interested, right? What's the point, right? So at least ask a few probing questions, right? Are you in that space, for example? Or if I could show you, an example would be, let's say you're pitching someone via LinkedIn. Don't pitch them blind and cut and paste the same message you're sending to everybody else. Pay a couple of minutes of attention to what's actually on their profile. Look at some of the publications they've put out and try to find a person who's truly interested in what you're working on, right? Give him that ounce of respect because he's going to give it back to you, okay? And then craft a custom message that shows that you've gone through the length of actually researching who they are and what they do. And that person, instead of just clicking off and said, this is just another spam message, just said, wow, this person really looked at who I am, what I'm interested in. I'm going to give them an equal amount of respect back, even if I have to say no ultimately, right? But you got to be a little sensitive on some of these issues, because you want to give the same amount of respect to potential investor that you would expect he gives you if he's interested.
Okay, understood. Good points. A lot of information. And you said this is a 3-day event. It seems like, a lot of people really need to. It's virtual or in person with the COVID?
That's a very good question. So we're shooting for a physical event with a virtual dimension. So a limited version of it will be available remotely.
Okay.
Although we're strongly hoping, that's the reason why we picked 6 months ago the date of October 2021.
Okay.
We're hoping to be at the very tail end of COVID.
Okay.
With vaccination campaigns that are really ramping up around the world right now. And at one point in time, I think that people are just going to be tired of sitting at home and having a headset on. There's nothing wrong with that, because it's actually a blessing, because I think what it's doing for everyone around the world, especially for the older generations who were very much afraid of this type of technology, is they started to realize that's right. And I think what we're going to see after this is a massive leap in productivity as a result of that.
Great.
Right? Yes. Because people, taking a plane to go from Los Angeles to New York to meet someone,
it's not necessary anymore.
Not at all.
Not at all. All right, Dom, let me ask you the random question, because I've taken up more time of your time today than I expected to.
No worries.
So I asked the lemonade question because I have a little cousin, little second cousin, and she was like, I need some money for Lana, can you give me some money for my lemonade stand? So now I'm gonna be like, well, you need to talk to Dom and get your pitch together and come back to me, and then maybe 100%. I'll give you the. So let's see here. Let's see what we got. What's one item on your bucket list besides buying the team?
Oh, difficult question. I have more than one item on the bucket list, but probably the most immediate one is to expand into over 30,000 square feet of space and take what we've built so far and scale it much larger, which will make us the largest rural incubator and accelerator in the world.
Okay, awesome. Now, let me ask one more question. You're in France, and you mentioned in some of the write-up that France is really a good place for startups. It used to be California used to be known for that startup industry. What makes France so special?
A number of things. So for those of you who know a little bit about France, you probably have heard of the French president Emmanuel Macron, who came into power in 2017 and basically coined the term startup nation. Basically, what the administration has done is they've put forward very aggressive legislation meant to simplify a lot of processes. The ability of being able to hire foreign people via a talent passport visa, the ability of investors being able to acquire a French visa by way of investment, as long as they invest into a French tech company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really been extremely dynamic, even during COVID. For example, we've been continuously grown through COVID. First 2 months, it was slower because everybody, basically was shock and awe, and nobody was responding to anything. And then after that, everybody started waking up. Oh, we're still alive. Nobody.
The world didn't end. Right?
We still have to work. We still have to eat, et cetera, right? And it just came back in full swing, especially in the technology field, obviously, right?
Yes.
Which is kind of easy to understand. So I think that if I had to do it again, I would certainly come back to France. It's not because I'm a French guy that I made the decision, because I did make the opposite decision in the early 90s. And then in the late 20-teens, I realized, you know what? Today, you could literally run your business from anywhere. And I'm asked that question actually very often, because I've been on both sides, in the US and in France and most all over Europe. And people ask me, which one do you like better? I said, well, after 25 years of being asked the same question, I came up with one sentence that sums it up. And that sentence goes as follows. It's probably easier to make your money in the US, but it's so much nicer to spend it in France.
Ah, love that. Love it. I'm with you. I enjoy every bit of France as well. So, Dom, now that I've just spent all of your day, tell us how that we get in touch with you, how people find out more about your event, and just give us all of the lowdown.
All right. So the easiest way to get in touch with me is probably on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I am the only Dom Einhorn on LinkedIn, as far as I know. So first name Dom, D-O-M, as in Mary, Einhorn, E-I-N-H-O-R-N. Website is unicornincubator.com. That's unicorn with a Q. Email is dom@unicornincubator.com. And if you're interested in the Startup Supercup, that website is Startup Supercup, all in one string.com, no dashes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also on Facebook, Dom Einhorn on Facebook.
All right. Awesome stuff. Well, Dom, thank you for hanging out with me today. You had just a lot of information. I really learned a lot. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Lana.
Awesome.
Pleasure.
That's all for this week's episode of The Male Perspective. I'm your host, Lana Reid, and I will see everybody next time.